Okay, so my name is Amanda Pollocky, and I have the great joy of moderating today. This event is put on by the Samuel Lawrence Foundation and the Coalition for Nuclear Safety. We are thrilled to be joined.
By Mr. Eric Epstein.
It's impossible to share the full breadth and depth of your work, but I'll give it a try. So, for over 30 years,
Mr. Epstein.
specialized in research, litigation, and provided expert testimony on the following nuclear issues: decommissioning, decontamination, environmental safety, rate recovery, at waste isolation.
Eric Epstein is
Chairman of 3 Mile Island Alert, a safe energy organization based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. TMIA monitors Peach Bottom, Susquehanna, and 3 Mile Island nuclear generating stations.
Mr.
Is
Epstein.
the coordinator of EFMR Monitoring, a nonpartisan community-based organization established in 1992. EFMR monitored radiation levels at Peach Bottom and 3 Mile Island nuclear generating stations, invested in community development, and sponsored remote robotics research. Thank you for joining us today, Eric.
Okay.
And we can go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
The first slide you see is basically monitoring's been possible because of settlements. Amergen was TMI Unit 1. Exelon owns 3 Mile Island in Philadelphia, or Peach Bottom, and First Energy owns TMI 2. GPU Nuclear was the first settlement. So we had 4 settlements. So the monitoring was only possible because of the settlements and was only a part of the settlement. And I'll get into that later. Can we hit the second slide? Okay, so we swung for the fences back in '83, and we were 1 vote away from getting a clean air ordinance, which would have given us the ability to monitor radiation releases from 3 Mile Island. And then also, I'll be honest with you, that was a year before the plant restarted. So there was an accident at TMI 2, and TMI 1 was down for refueling. There was a lot of litigation. So in 1983, TMI 1 was still down. The Clean Air Ordinance was our attempt to essentially prevent the plant from operating by passing restrictive clean air regulations. So if you go to the next slide, what occurred after that was a partnership with Dauphin County, where 3 Mile Island is, TMI Alert, and then the company that was operating TMI at the time, which was MedEd, it was then GPU. So what you see there are 16 monitors, and this was our first attempt to do it. It cost about 250 grand a year. Very sensitive monitors, they're gamma monitors. Technology was difficult. We had to go to the county courthouse basement to do the readings. So it was difficult to really call this a real-time project. What was interesting is if you look at the location, and like most radiation monitoring, it wasn't done on population or rows or windrows. So these monitors are located based on what was easiest to hook up. And you can see they're mostly within 5 miles of the plant. Not great location. However, and if you can see, there's a dense amount of monitors near TMI, unbelievably sensitive. So the aim was atmospheric radiation, but the end result was that we were able to monitor radioactive waste going off the island during the cleanup. And we were able to monitor things to the degree that we could tell when radioactive laundry was going to Boyertown, Pennsylvania. So it was a real great tool. So then we enter into a comprehensive settlement 13 years after the accident. You can go back to the other slide real quick, if you could, please. One of the things that we've always done, and a lot that people haven't understood, is rather than ask for a lot of money, we've been able to get access to proprietary information, whether I'm not saying info-like, but very sensitive information. So we're able to maintain the Reuters stokes, have regular meetings. We installed a remote temperature detector at the base of the reactor vessel at TMI 2, and this would be prescient because we weren't monitoring for radiation, we were monitoring for temperature differentials, which was kind of the same aim we had for the dry cast at Peach Bottom. Also, this wouldn't have worked without a partnership. I mean, we and the company really disliked each other intensely. So the third party was Dickinson College, a small private college in Carlisle. There we have our archives, which we established are very intensive. We're stored right next to Joseph Priestley. We have a virtual museum. We have oral histories from year 0 and year 25. And then nobody who was in the radiation monitoring protocol could participate unless they went through a 3-hour training. And the settlement funded Dickinson, not us, to have a lab. This was controversial because one of the people associated with the training was very pro-nuclear, Wilson Schwartz, and then one of the people was a little more progressive. I made the decision to go that direction because I didn't want what we did to be criticized as being partisan. Next slide, please. All right, what we also did, we expanded. One of the frustrations we had is that the utility, which is now a private company, which is now a limited liability company, dominated the curriculum in the schools, and we were locked out. What you'll see here we did is an environmental timeline, which was extremely popular. We partnered with DEP and Slippery Rock University. We also put out 4 Pennsylvania-centric curriculums on coal, nuclear, solar, and wind, which were non-judgmental. So our curriculum is widely used by colleges and high schools, and it goes under the moniker of EFMR rather than TMI alert. Next slide, please. All right, this will give you an example of the problems we encountered. So we started out, we deployed 75 handheld monitors in the 90s. That's about as advanced as the technology was then. The Rat Alert, which is made by International MedCom in Northern California, we partnered with. Here's the problem. There was no computer to hook it up at that time. And so people had to actually record the results, send them in. There was a time delay. There was also a problem with masking. We're at the southern end of the radon prong. So where you locate a monitor in our area is important. You cannot locate it in a basement. You cannot locate it near a chimney. There's a lot of sandstone here. And the preference is outside. That's hard. So these monitors, for the most part, were all inside. Now I just put a sampling here. This is just a sampling. One of the problems you have, and just looking at 19 of our monitors, is that it depends on the fidelity of the person taking the readings, on the number you're going to get, when you're going to get them. And we had software. We went from people recording the weather to getting the software to just basically subscribing to AccuWeather so that we would have a template. So people did the training. We had people worked at TMI. A lot of organizations, individuals participated, but they got monitors based on interest, not on science. And the problem with that is gives you a biased profile. The other problem with that is you're looking at roughly several 100,000 readings for just 19 units. We had 75. When we switched protocol, we wound up getting millions of data points. It was just too much data. What we wound up doing here, and you're going to see these numbers where it says the average reading. So we have a raw background of 12.5 being the norm. We set the monitors to 30, meaning the monitors automatically went off at 30 so that you would be alert, you would woken up, and you would note it. Still not really sure what to do with that profile. Can you do the next slide, please? So we hired a statistician, and that can be biased as well. So Dick Stober, great guy, did our stats for 10, 15 years. Again, it costs money. So we had the lab, we had the statistician, we had 2 health physicists through another settlement. We located 5 low volume air samplers, and the low volume air samplers required people to go out and do the sampling. So we would do it weekly and also biannually, depending upon what we were looking for in the air. And what we did is we paid interns from Dickinson who were mostly pro-nuclear to collect the data. That went well, but one of our monitors were located in a goat farm. And we had an incident where one of our kids got gored by a goat. So we had to seek a new radiation. I don't know if you're aware of it, but 3 Mile Island is although it's 12 miles from Harrisburg, it's a very rural area, and we're very close to Amish, Mennonite, and a lot of farming. So I just, for liability reasons, I didn't want to be sued for a kid getting gored by a goat. Next slide. Although I'm sure he's going through a lot of counseling now. So at any rate, Wilson Schwartz, he was on the TMI advisory panel. We didn't really agree about a lot. But here's his official study that he published, and I can share it with you. I don't think he thought that working with us was going to work, but it did. And you can see this is working with an anti-nuclear group, which I don't like being called anti-nuclear. We're a safe energy group and a watchdog. However, you can see there's a number of things that came from years of working with them. When I told you about some of these before, the data and information gathering, East and West Shore, I don't know what the demographics are around your plant, but the East Shore is agrarian in the Harrisburg area and tends to be lower middle income. The West Shore is not. And, there's attitudes there. We had false positives. As I told you, we had the red alerts program to go off at 30. We had a case where some guy was at a couple hundred. He was a nuclear engineer. It took us 2 days to figure out that he had just had a barium enema done. So, you learn and you live that you can have false positives around here from radon, washout. And the other thing, and you can see the number of these issues we had. The low volume air samplers I told you about were great monitors. They're also very loud, extremely loud. So we had to work around that. Again, these are just things we learned with time and through experience, and hopefully you can avoid. But the false positive, one of the things that we got to by the time is every monitor we had a personality. And so their norm was different based on season, based on location, and based on some other conditions. Next slide, please. All right, so we got sophisticated monitors, but it wound up being a problem. It was another settlement. We got thermo Eberlein monitors, very sophisticated, real-time, state-of-the-art. They were German. And what we didn't anticipate, really not good support. Simple things like metric to standard doesn't work so well. Because the monitors had to be installed in Pennsylvania as a Commonwealth, and we had to negotiate 5 different zoning regulations. So again, I don't know what it's like in California, but every monitor out, even though there's 5 of them, we're a different municipality with different laws, with different municipal standards. At the time, the internet wasn't what it was. And so we had 5 different phone bills, which were really expensive. And then we had masking problems. One was at the airport, and then in South Harrisburg, one was next to an incinerator. Next slide, please. And this is stuff that these great monitors, really expensive monitors. We had the guys coming over from Germany. I got to tell you, it was pretty wild when your data support has to fly in from Germany and he's chain smoking non-filter cigarettes. It was a little weird, and you had to tell them that you're in the home of a vegan, Quaker, or Mennonite, whatever. But just didn't work. Let's just say it. So that was a lesson learned. Next slide. All right, here's the summary of this. What was interesting, we already talked about the bad equipment. You can see the summary from Wilson Schwartz is pretty good. Now, he worked with the company too. And I don't think he really wanted to say that the experience was rewarding and satisfying. It was, and then we split company, and the person we replaced him with took us to the next level. Next slide, please. All right, so what we did next is we made our own equipment, and it's called a ST10 radiation monitor. So I hired a technician, hired 2 guys that used to work at 3 Mile Island in Peach Bottom, but they were, and look, and I would do it again. They knew nuclear. They knew TMI, they knew Peach Bottom. I may be different than you. This is a pretty rough and tumble area, and I grew up playing football and drinking beer with these guys. So I'll be frank with you. One of the reasons we had success was that connection. TMI, forget the monitoring, but when they farted, we smelled it before they felt it, because a lot of the owners were not from here. A lot of the brass was from not here. And that's a really important distinction. And anytime we did anything, we made sure that as part of our settlements, community investment increased. So we were buying ambulances, we were buying support services, diabetes books. So I got to tell you, part of this settlement is the monitoring, but the other part was education. And a large part of it was putting money back into the community. And part of that too is we invested in remote robotics, which they didn't want to do. Altogether about 1.5 million. So we reduced worker dose at TMI and Peach Bottom by deploying robots, which actually created jobs and made money for the company because the robots wound up getting used at other plants. So we were also lucky because Carnegie Mellon was a partner, and that's significant. So at any rate, so here's the problem. So we get these monitors, the monitors work well, we hook them up to the computers. If you look at the top, you're getting a lot, just a lot of readings. You know, it got to the point where we had to have backup data storage. So one of the things that became really interesting for us is that our new person, Roger Grunlin, who replaced John Wilson Schwartz, was like the dean of health physics, but he was committed to citizen monitoring. He had done the citizen monitoring at Saxton, which was a small reactor. And he was actually, this is true, the head of the Department of Penn State. So they have a little 2-megawatt reactor. And it was interesting because he used to take me there and we split atoms, and then you could look out the window and see the Joe Paterno statue. So I'm still doing a lot of counseling from that experience. So suffice to say, he was dedicated to citizen monitoring. And when we met with Exelon, I think they were freaked out that we had taken it to a level that went beyond the monitoring they were actually doing, and the funding ran out. Next slide. Here are our challenges. People interested in nuclear. Look, when we have a meeting, it's like an ARP reunion. Not a lot of young people. Same thing is happening on the other side. Way too much data. We didn't know what to do with it. If you look, I sent Amanda a companion document. And if you look at that document, it's just a lot of data. Because what do? You print one thing and people fear you're biased. You print another thing, they think you're biased. So here it is. You know, and our statistician drew conclusions. It's a challenge. This was a couple $100,000 a year. You need to get funding. And there needs to be political support. You know, it's 40 years since TMI and people just lost interest. And I'll be honest with you, with younger people that actually viewed nuclear as a solution to climate change. So it was hard to grow our base. I'm just being frank. It's a challenge. The other thing, so that you know, whenever we do litigation, is we believe you have to come to the table with more than an appetite. You got to put something on the table. You have to be willing to make a compromise. Everything coming out of somebody else's mouth is not wrong. And you got to be willing to acknowledge that. As part of these settlements, we worked with the NRC and the company, and it went well in the 90s before the SALP was actually replaced by the ROP. So we had really good relationships on the ground, which helped. You know, then in the era of deregulation, you don't know who the hell owns the plant. Next slide. All right, this is the final slide. So I think these didn't come out well. It's not Amanda's fault, it's my fault. But what we did, this is where we located the monitors by the end, our ST10s, and it looks like a Rorschach test. We located monitors based on wind and population. You know, so there was no real reason for us to have more than 1 or 2 monitors down in Clyde, Northern York, or Southern York. I mean, the radiation isn't going there. We had one incident with steam generator replacement where there's 150 people contaminated, where we detected significant radiation to the south. So we took the tech specs, the nuke regs. This took forever. And basically we're able to coordinate population concentrations with wind direction. The irony is that if you look at the plumes that came out during the 3 Mile Island accident, they almost match up exclusively with where we monitor now. And, you know, that's where, based on the work that North Carolina did and some of the other epidemiologists, that's where the cancer was. I mean, if you come around to where we started 40 years ago, monitors were evenly distributed, but radiation isn't. And the radiation exposure is not evenly distributed. So in 1985, when Pennsylvania did their groundbreaking study, which is kind of asinine, because radiogenic cancer, you can't definitively state what happens 6 years after exposure. what we did is we conducted 4 interviews. This is going off a little off topic, and we went person to person. So based on this theory we developed, which included health effects and monitoring, we canvassed all the neighborhoods within 5 miles where the plumes went, and those are part of studies that we have. And what we did is we just asked people what they experienced. Really, really interesting, because this would basically, a lot of the people would probably be red on the political vantage point. So it was interesting doing those. Also, you had to like Pabst Blue Ribbon, that helped. But at the end of this, I would just say, and if you can go to the other, I don't know if you can, Amanda, bring in the other document. I just want to show it to you and then I'll shut up, which is difficult for me. There's another document I sent, and it was our 2005 biennial report. I'd encourage you to look at it because the monitoring we did, there were 3 other things that made it successful. At the time of the accident, the emergency planning was awful. Absolutely awful. You can just bring it up a little and just stop there. You can go through. So we provided the community with independent monitoring. We provided the community with access to potassium iodide. And the other thing that happened to us, and I don't know if this was a blessing, because of the accident, we were a more credible source of information than the company or the NRC, which was a burden. If you pull down all the way to the bottom, Amanda, and you can read this somewhere else, this just tells you what a great, these are all the reading. I mean, once you get it going, you got to be committed to this. And that's the last thing I'm going to say is people burn out. People also move. That's a funny thing. And people die and your monitors don't come back. And I didn't feel like going to the funeral and saying, can I have my monitor back? It would seem a little not there. So by the end of it, you can see everything we've done is kind of here. The EFMR website is still up. You can go there. And our final phase was to do aggressive emergency planning intervention. And basically that brought everything together. How are we going to get the kids out? How are we going to get them medicine? And can we get monitors in their hands? What we found, there were 74 daycare centers within 10 miles of TMI. Pennsylvania has a weird law because most of the daycares are private. There's no plan. Unless they're a public facility, there's no plan. So that's there for you guys to look at. I didn't know if you had any questions. I mean, the one thing that you should get out of this is that I'm not related to Jeffrey Epstein.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. We have a ton of questions coming in and people submitted over 30 just leading up to this presentation. And so there's a lot of interest and we're really excited to kind of dive into these.
Okay.
Okay, so Mike Carberry and Bart Ziegler ask what lessons from 3 Mile Island can be applied to other reactor fights?
I think you have to view this not as a sprint, but as a marathon. And, you got to make sure that you have the resources, and you have to be sure that when you say that you're concerned about other people, you really are. So that, we've gotten to the point where 3 Mile Island is shut down, but we worked hard to make sure that we had a bridge with the workers at all times. We didn't want to, have an adversarial situation. So 3 lessons I would take away is make sure that you have adequate funding. Just like COVID, this has got to be good science. You can't go in, thinking that, there's these elevated releases and we're there to find them. If they're there, they're there. The third component of this was we didn't really have enough time to do dry cask storage. We started to try it at Peach Bottom and a lot of resistance. Peach Bottom is on the York, Maryland border. Rough, Mason-Dixon, Civil War still being fought down there. But I wish we had more time to do that. And I'll just add a little asterisk. We were one of the few people that have dry cask experience in a bad way. Most of the fuel from TMI was taken to Idaho. And the license for the TMI-2 fuel was just extended last summer. And we have a lot of problems. I mean, casks break down. This shouldn't surprise anybody. And so the lesson, is good people, good science, good funding. And then realize you got to replenish your ranks. it's hard. One of the reasons we had success is because with the money, we had a college who then in turn hired interns. I mean, huge. I can't underestimate how huge it is. The kids were fantastic. And plus, they're 18 to 25, so they're durable, they're breakable, and you can get new ones. I don't think that came out right.
Well, that's good to know, especially that it's a marathon, not a sprint. George Carpat asks how much radioactive materials were released in the accident at 3 Mile Island and how much has been released since
Yeah,
then.
that's tough because, at the time of the accident, the equipment just wasn't good. Monitors went off stack, filters were clogged, and a lot of monitors were missing. We just weren't built to pick up radiation. If you recall, at the time of the TMI accident, we didn't even have decommissioning funds in Pennsylvania, which wound up becoming a nightmare scenario down the road. So I would direct you, the first study that was done was by Jan Beya, B-E-Y-A, from the Audubon Society. So you're looking at a range. I could send you information. I know Arnie Gunderson, Dave Lochbaum have different ranges. That's the best we can do. I have that. And so like afterwards, if you send me stuff you want, I can send you to give you an idea. We've had a number of significant incidents afterwards. In the early 80s, we had what was known as the reactor head lift, and the polar crane failed, and we had a lot of radiation. We had a krypton venting situation, which was illegal. This is great. We won the case after they released the radiation. So you had krypton, you had polar crane. Recently, about 10 years ago, you had 150 workers contaminated. And then that's when the monitoring paid off, when they changed out the steam generators. The most controversial aspect of this, and the riddle, and I'll be honest with you, that we completely failed at, was monitoring radioactive water. After the accident, there were 700,000 gallons of accident generated water. There were a number of groups that were formed after TMI. I was initially involved with the Susquehanna Valley Alliance in Lancaster. Our concern was water. And it's interesting, this morning I just gave testimony at the SRBC because nobody really thought about it. But now that they're cleaning up TMI2, just don't know what to do with the water. We won. So what eventually happened, to answer your question, the water turned out to be 2.3 million gallons and was evaporated. So, we have the day-to-day releases. What we found is consistent elevations during refueling. Absolutely. I mean, you can do that. And then with the water monitoring, I can just report that it's expensive and they were not going to let us on the island to monitor.
Wow. And just a quick, Gary Hedrick asked for a clarification. Are there actual examples of thin canisters failing?
There are the gaskets failed at TMI2 in the Idaho National Labs. I mean, the problem was, and I can send you, it was really, Brian, are you there? Yeah, I have an intern out there. We called Idaho and it was absolutely abrasive and dismissive when we tried to ask questions. I can send you the responses, but we've had cask failure. Most of the issues have been gasket, moisture related. These are old casks. I mean, it's 40 technology. Plus, when we were interrogated, they're not really sure what was in the cask. This is like spent fuel. There's dirt, there's components, and honestly, there hasn't been a visual inspection at TMI2 since the late 80s. So I don't think we have the prototype cast, but I can send you the experience we've had. What's interesting is that Idaho wants the waste out by 2035. And I can tell you, we're not taking it back at TMI, so I don't know where it goes, but a very unique arrangement. I would also point out, as much as people were empathetic with us in 79, when the fuel was being shipped across the country, everybody to a person was opposed to TMI fuel coming through their tap. Just to give you a sense of what transportation will be like. Everybody. We went from being very popular to being very unpopular.
I can imagine that's a hard fall.
Yeah.
And just another quick clarification question. Can you please repeat the names of the four settlements from your presentation?
Yeah, if you go to our website, they're in we basically give a history.
Great.
But we've had different settlements where we've been opportunistic. And the initial one was at TMI2 with GPU, but we had one when they transferred the license at TMI1. We had another one when they tried to get a license extension at TMI1. And then we had two settlements down with Peach Bottom, and that was related to Pennsylvania public utility litigation. So all these settlements were the result of long, hard, aggressive interventions.
Mhm.
Uh, it just, they were difficult, and that's a problem because after that situation, it's difficult to come up and not have hard feelings. I got to admit.
I can
Uh,
imagine.
yeah, not. I mean, I've had some thoughts I won't share with you about counsel from other folks.
Yeah. So Patricia Cardona wonders, what are the equipment and staffing requirements for radiation monitoring?
Well, it depends on how you're going to do it. I mean, we partnered with the university, and the company bought them a lab. So we had a lab. What we were lucky to do is because we had pro-nuclear health physicists, they had an existing relationship with the company and a comfort level.
Mhm.
So John was paid for his staff, for his training, and he actually purchased the equipment in the first agreement. In the second agreement, I wanted more control, and we switched to Roger up at Penn State. And then Roger worked with former workers at TMI. So I don't know if I can give you a good question, a good answer, because we had a lot of academic support staff, but we needed to have a technician, we needed a statistician, and we needed a health physicist. Otherwise, we would have been totally overwhelmed.
Got it. And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but Aaron Datesman wonders if you can talk a little bit more about the protocol for monitoring liquid batch releases.
We didn't have any, Aaron. I mean, I wish we did. We backed into, I guess the best way to say it is we were preoccupied with the disposition of radioactive water on site. So we did nothing with tritium migration. We did nothing, and it's an Achilles heel for us with water released into the Susquehanna. To be honest with you, we got preoccupied with water-related issues. And this was a failing. We probably should have partnered with sportsmen and conservation folks earlier. That part of the river, there's a lot of fishers. Right across from TMI is Shawley Island, a lot of campers. And the reason I'm saying this is that a lot of information that we got back didn't have to deal with radiation or contamination, but what's happening in the smallmouth bath, things of that nature. So we were reactive. Two other things I would point out. In the early 80s, water issues were dominated by acid rain fallout from Ohio and Western Pennsylvania. So when, there wasn't funding or interest, to be honest, people were battling acid rain. So you had that as one issue. And the preeminent issue with water was, no, hell no, you're not dumping this water in the river.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest with you, the monitoring, and this is a shortcoming on our side, was almost totally atmospheric.
Yep.
Also, to be honest with you, we were very critical of their REMP, the environmental monitoring protocol for aquatic life, for terrestrial life, for that kind of thing. So we were overwhelmed, Aaron. I wish I had better news for you. I don't. We really didn't do a great job there. Oh, the other thing I would point out is when it came to water, I don't know about you, we had challenges from invasive species. From the north, starting in Lake Erie and then up in the coal region, there were concerns about invasive species. We had Asiatic clams, and then we had the cleanup. So there was an agent known as clam troll. So when it came to water quality, most of the people around here, especially folks who ate fish, were concerned about clam troll, which is used to kill clams so that you can have coolant. It also stopped the cleanup, by the way, for a while. We had these microscopic organisms. And there was one other water. Oh, obviously the thermal inversion order hit us. So Aaron, hopefully that's a great no answer.
Well, it does point out that there are some lessons learned from 3 Mile Island in the fact that San Onofre now does liquid batch releases. And so there is an improvement on kind of some of the oversight that's taking place. Catherine Britton is asking for another clarification question. When you say that Idaho wants the waste out of there by 2035, is
Right.
that an estimation of the cast's obsolescence?
No, that's just Idaho just tired of the bullshit. I know that's not a precise legal term, but the deal we cut was that Idaho would take the waste for experimentation and research. I mean, totally non-plausible. We wanted the waste off the site, and shipping the waste off was difficult. There's a train track to the east of TMI, and we had 3 different occasions where the train track actually rolled backwards. And it was like, well, just get it out. All right. So it went to Idaho, and I'm assuming there was a financial incentive, but no. Again, I will send you some summaries of what we have. There's 2 things with the fuel. The assumption is that 99% is removed. We think the number is more like 97%. And the assumption is that K effective, the ability for it to go recritical, the utility of the industry think is low. We don't think that's the case, but at the time of the accident, nobody was thinking about fires or terrorism or things of that nature. So I don't know if that factors into where Idaho is, but Idaho now, I think, signed an agreement with DOE that there'll be a minimum amount of waste coming out from outside their border, but it's not the obsolescence. I don't know what they're going to do with these casts, because this is dry. These are casts in the infancy of the development. By the way, I just want to point out, this is probably a little different. 3 Mile Island is part of what I would call the energy Levittown of America. So when you go to 3 Mile Island, across from 3 Mile Island is Bruner Island, a coal plant, which was then converted to gas. A little down from TMI is York Haven Dam. So in the 60s, when all this was planned out, and I have this map of Lake Frederick, you have atomic plant, coal plant, hydro plant. It's the best water skiing on the river, a lot of recreation. It'll freak you out, because when you come to TMI, you'll see the islands right next to TMI have cabins. So people continue to fish there every day, hunt there, farm there. It's an interesting tension. Again, it may be a little different from where you're at, but that part of the river has a lot of energy assets.
Well, and that kind of ties into this next question. Nancy Van asks, are you looking to kind of follow up on some of the TMI deaths, cancer, and possibly DNA damage from the area?
Well, I mean, there's really only so much we can do. Going back to the initial question, we're all volunteers. Our budget is $10,000 a year, honestly. And I mean, most of our membership served in the Civil War. So, you have to decide what you can and cannot do. So what we've done is we've had a number of health surveys which we conducted, and we're putting out our final health survey. It's interesting. Penn State, Hershey is close to us, and that's a whole different story, because Hershey did continue to make chocolate during the accident. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a limit to what we can do in terms of health. Let me just bifurcate this. All the psychological studies that were done concluded that there was chronic elevated stress. Whole batch of psych studies. My assumption is, because of time, the psych stress studies are probably done. The health effect studies, Hershey Medical, the thyroid is the study that's going to continue. There's another round of thyroid stuff. You got to get the money to do it. You got to have credible folks to do it. Penn State is a very pro-nuclear university, and Penn State Hershey is Penn State. And so it's a delicate balance. So to answer your question is, all our anecdotal evidence has been transferred. I would direct you to a study that most people never look at. It's called the category surveys. It was done in the late 80s. There was a couple that came from Japan, And, when we did our surveys, we were trying to figure out what to do. The Amots, Newberry Township Steering, there was a number of groups. The categories, and I could send you this, did a volume of surveys. And it was interesting, a Japanese couple going door to door in NASCAR America. And again, man, I got to tell you, this is rural. You go to some of these places at TMI, man, and it's red. And that's just not the political flavor. That's the neck. And I'm telling you that because when TMI came here, the jobs were good. The money was flowing. As late as 1999, there were 802 jobs at TMI. During the cleanup at TMI 2, there was 1,000. 0 jobs at TMI 2. 0 jobs. TMI 1, when they went into their slowdown, they were at 525. They're at 400. They've taken us to court not to pay any taxes. So, I know this isn't about monitoring, but it's been really important for us to cultivate political relationships. And most of our representatives are Republican. So, if there's any advice, man, there's value to me. The value came from the long-term relationships.
Yeah, I can see how that's really valuable. So Megan Sargent wonders, should the Nuclear Regulatory Commission be restructured to afford more clout from local authorities and stakeholders? If so, how would you envision a restructure?
Well, the NRC has no value for us. I mean, honestly, you had to make a decision. Our best relationship with the NRC occurred in the 90s, and that was based on the relationships we had with the resident inspectors who changed out. The other thing I'd point out, and I'm a bit older, probably not as old as Bart, who I think is pretty ancient, and went to school with Norman Lear. But the first batch of nuclear people that were at 3 Mile Island and Peach Bottom opened in '74. Remember, we monitored 3 plants. So nuclear was supposed to be what replaced coal. We're in the southern end of the coal region. So up in the coal region, you have Susquehanna, you have TMI, you have Peach Bottom. This was, so there's a lot of psychology here. The western part of our state is Westinghouse. This is a firmly pro-nuclear state. So a lot of, what we did occurred in the context, and I'm going to be blunt. We were definitely fringe until the meltdown. There's nothing like a meltdown to move you from being a pariah to a messiah in 24 hours. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. And, what I'm saying is part of what we do is we want to make sure that when we monitor radiation or when we do anything that's going to have an economic impact, we have an alternative, we have an option that we can work together with the community. I know I'm hitting that hard again, but I forgot the question. I need to revisit. I kind of lost myself in a loop there.
Just if the NRC should be restructured for more clout.
Yeah, I mean, to me, they're, and you could see it with COVID. I've been on a lot with these calls. They're absolutely awful. Yes, should they be restructured? I would say this: we just play in venues in which we can have a difference. So for us, over time, it wasn't the NRC. I mean, look, and that's why it's hard to recruit young people. It's very technical. You have to learn the technical terms, the financial terms, the accounting terms, and you never win. What's a win? When you monitor nuclear, okay, a win is that you minimize the damage. That's it's not a great way to recruit to say, look, we're going to go 0-15 again this year, but the margin of the loss will be less. Difficult to recruit. So the 2 venues where we've had a lot of success, the Public Utility Commission. One of the things, again, that we learned really quickly, and I'll tell you a quick story, is that when they built these power plants in the 60s, electric was cheap. There was no energy efficiency, no conservation. These were all electric homes. When they built the last nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania, we had people crying. And these were people, by the way, and remember, TMI's happening in '79 in the shadow of the Vietnam War in a redneck area, and it's putting together people in the same room. Difficult, okay? So that being said, when we started doing the rate hearings, we got a lot of empathy. Nobody wants their bills going up. And why were they going up? Yeah, a nuclear power plant, over budget, constantly over budget. So we did a lot of work in the Public Utility Commission, and now we're doing a lot of work at the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. You can't live if you don't eat and drink water. Well, we're not going to be able to cut off the food supply, but we can strangle the water. And water is a commodity. And so why would we play in the NRC when, we still have a couple suits there, but I mean, it's awful. I mean, the NRC, their judges are like a combination of Franz Kafka and Lewis Carroll in one. So I don't know if that's helpful. By the way, our state DEP is not helpful. They're an enabler. I don't know how your state regulatory authority is. So we just play in the areas where we're I don't want to say play, but work in the areas where we're likely to have success. I mean, a moral victory doesn't put food on your table.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it looks like we have about 10 minutes left. How much more time are you able to spend answering questions? We still have a few. And if you have to go, maybe you'd be able to answer them through a Word document or something else.
Well, it's Friday and I'm Jewish, so we have till the satanic cult starts at sundown.
All right, we'll keep that in mind. So Catherine Britton asks, what's your single most persuasive argument on hazards of nuclear waste? What audiences, if any, do you find are most receptive?
Economic. I mean, I will tell you what changed me. We actually 10 years ago did a presentation with the Cato Institute. And that was interesting. But the economic argument, and look, everybody wants to know about the accident and the health effects, but the driver was economics. In fact, that's why we were able to defeat the bailout. Pennsylvania was the only state that they stumbled. And there were three reasons. One was the cost. The second was this is a gas state. And third is Republicans. They were the ones who always said, oh, no, this is too expensive. I said, so why are you bailing out a profitable industry? So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but our most effective argument has been the cost of nuclear power. And, I would say the other argument, which still really is effective, is, what are you going to do with the radioactive waste? There is no solution. I've been in it for 40 years and you get tired of hearing, we'll get to it at some day. What I tell people, and then I'll get back to the economic story, is you wouldn't buy a house from a contractor who said, we'll install the toilets 40 years later. That's complete bullshit, right? No, we want the toilets now, okay? It's kind of important. So I'm in Johnstown in 1985, and I own stock in all the companies. And I tell you may do it, are shareholder resolutions. One of the things I found out real quickly is the shareholders they're not pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear, they're pro-dividend. And so utility stock used to be orphan stock. You paid a quarterly dividend, and widow stock. The company that owned TMI hadn't paid dividend in 7 years. So I'm in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's the flood. The town still feels like the flood. It's sad. It used to be a steel town. It's coming back. But I got up to give my 2-minute speech like I do every year, and I got the same response: "Shut up, you're an asshole." I said, "Thank you, appreciate it." But I just said, and this was just fly the pants. I said, it wasn't an official resolution. I said, why don't we do this? If you guys feel this strongly about nuclear power, why don't we link corporate compensation to nuclear performance? Boom. I mean, by the last shareholder meeting I went to in 99, I had 25% of the shareholders. That's a big number. Now, they never were formal resolutions, but 25%, it went from being really hostile to you have other people asking the questions. And so it goes back to the economic. I would also say this, and this is a very chilling and emotional point. They never issued an apology for the meltdown at 3 Mile Island. So in 1999, I went to Parsippany, New Jersey, and the president of the company was Fred Hafer. And I just said, Fred, it's 20 years after the accident, I think you owe us an apology. He said, we have nothing to apologize for, Eric. I'm not apologizing for anything. And, that's one of those moments when you have those impure thoughts. And I left the meeting and it was really interesting. Up to me came the president and the CEO of the people that owned TMI during the accident, and they apologized. And in return, and I'll be honest with you, I apologized to them because I had done some real bruising. This is cold steel area, man. So, this was not a Gandhi sequel. It was real interesting. Their wives were there, quintessential 1950s hairdo, big bouffants and everything. And it was a real important moment for me when I recognized that I had done some things I wish I hadn't. But they said, Fred's wrong. We should have apologized for you. We believe in nuclear power. And that was really meaningful. It was, but that was the company. They have never accepted responsibility because in their mind, then that invites liability. As soon as they said, yeah, we were responsible for the accident, they're going to get sued. So, and that company no longer exists.
Well, it's good to note. And I think focusing on some of the economic pieces as well as the health and accident is important when we frame kind of our arguments and working to persuade the public. Just a quick question. So Aaron Datesman has long been fascinated with that Norman Rasmussen of MIT nuclear engineering professor, and
Right.
he's a native of Harrisburg. He's just wondering, have you ever encountered him as a fellow Harrisburg native?
No, I mean, Norman, I think, did the WASH 1400 study. I mean, that's going back a while. Yeah, look, you're in a strange circuit. This is kind of like when you're dealing with these personalities and principles from the accident, it's kind of like the Lemon Sisters touring with ZZ Top. You're in the same room with these people, but it's weird and it's awkward. And I would say there's a couple people, and I don't know if this is helpful, but Norman I did not meet. Other people I've met, Governor Thornburg, who was a very moderate Republican and a conservative, had a really good relationship with. We both understood where one another were coming from, and were able to operate like that. I'm trying to think, maybe you can remind me, the person I had a very strained relationship with was the gentleman that came in from that Carter sent, the spokesperson. His name escapes me right now. He's recently passed away. But Aaron, sorry, I never met Norman. And look, the people I met, there were two kinds. We had nuclear royalty come to TMI because everybody wanted to be there. It was like a Boy Scout badge when you did a cleanup. I spent a month there, and it's like, yeah, well, dude, I was born and raised there. So you had some folks that were iconic. I mean, Carter was there, and actually I thought did a good job. But we were not able to reach him again. Rick Over was very controversial. He came to 3 Mile Island, gave it his blessing, and then his son and daughter-in-law alleged that he was mentally not all there. And then we had found out that the company had paid him. So Harold Denton was the guy I was thinking of. So, every once in a while you're doing these symposiums with folks, and, it's just strange. They all left and we're still here.
Yeah, that's got to be an interesting thing to kind of deal with. And I just wanted to, it's almost 12:30 now. We're coming up on the 1 hour mark, and we'll continue to ask Eric questions, but until you want to wrap up. But we are recording this for later viewing. So if you have to jump off the call, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We still have 20 questions, so we may need to look at shortening some of the answers, just as a heads up. So Thomas Kimmett wonders, why is nuclear now touted as the clean energy alternative, given the history of disasters from meltdowns and cleanups?
Thomas Kimmett, my friend from Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, who's taking me out for lunch next week. So I'm going to order a really big scooping of everything. I will share with you what Roger shared with me, is that nuclear is kind of in our DNA. There's kind of like a testosterone element to nuclear. And I know when TMI happened, it was, Iran was happening, the Vietnam War was happening, and it was like, God, oil lines, buying gas every other day. And it was, people were holding on to the nuclear deterrent, nuclear power. I think it all merged. And, Roger said something to me that was interesting. We were up in rural Pennsylvania, and he said, in 1959 at Penn State, Milton Eisenhower had accompanied him to dedicate the reactor there. And, he said, Eric, from 59 to 79, I couldn't do anything wrong. And he said, after 79, I couldn't do anything right. And that, really troubled me, because nobody's that right, nobody's that wrong. And, suffice to say to answer Tom's question is, nuclear has this allure, this charm. I mean, there's one party in America, the nuclear party. Everybody in Pennsylvania say, we're for nuclear if we could do it safe. And that's why it goes back to what you were saying. What do? Is you hit the economics. Nuclear is the reason why your mother can't blow dry your hair. It's a real simple formula. And with the advent of conservative politics and no bailouts, and, that's what we've been successfully able to attach the message to. Look, to me, whoever wins at the marketplace, that's who wins. I think nuclear is over. But I think the burial costs are going to be substantial and elongated. It's done. It's over. Look, when we first started, and I'll be honest with you, we were proponents of coal in the early 80s. And then when I became one of the people that founded the Sustainable Energy Fund, you need to demonstrate that you have reliable alternatives. And I had to surrender to the fact that whatever I do, and if I want it to be green has to be clean, and it has to be profitable. It has to be entrepreneurial. I mean, that, and people don't want to change your lifestyle. Plug it in, whatever you do. I'm good with that. But we used to be mocked by the nuclear industry when we said wind, solar, green. And now that's how they market themselves. So, which is cool, I guess. But I'll finish up with Tom next week. He's taking me out for a high-end lunch.
Lucky you. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So at San Onofre, the utility managers are very proud that they've installed several Geiger counters around the perimeter of the plant. Can you explain to us why the setup is insufficient to monitor a nuclear waste site? And just a second part of that, Kathy Iwani asked if you can recommend a stellar system of monitoring for concerned citizens.
Yeah, I've always felt that monitoring is abused and biased and subject to interpretation. Look, I'll go back to TMI. They used to brag about TLDs, which were worthless. Thermal what you need real-time monitoring, and you need independent access to the monitors. So I'll give you a contemporary example. Pennsylvania is now a gas state, but one of the byproducts of gas is radioactive sludge. We were asked to do monitoring for the industry, and we declined because we wanted to do it independently. We wanted to own the data. And we wanted to have life cycle control. Just because there's not a release now, I don't know where it's going, and I don't want you using me to sign off on whatever you do. So, in my mind, and I've said this before, when it comes to dry cast, it has to be above grade, above ground. The waste has to be retrievable. You have to monitor for temperature, for helium, for radiation. Otherwise, I really don't want to have a conversation with you. A Geiger counter is great if you're going to a 1950 science fiction movie reunion. I mean, should say. The monitors over time have become much more power, much more sensitive. We work with International MedCom. We made our own monitors, and like I said, you can learn from our experience, but it depends what you want to do. We just felt that we had to make it easy. It had to be sensitive, it had to be remote, and it had to be real time. Whenever I want to know what's going on. And what are you monitoring for? So I mean, this is, in my mind, as I said before, it's really crucial to have a health physicist, a statistician, and a technician. because whatever results you have are going to be called into question. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that would be my macro approach. And this is what we need to have in place. I don't want to endorse anybody. I know out there, Donna Gilmore seems to be extremely well informed on that issue. I would defer to her.
Great. We'll reach out to her with that. So Ace Hoffman wants to know if you know how many radiation monitors each nuclear power plant has and what distance they are from plants and nuclear waste canisters.
I don't, and I don't think it's uniform. We deal with 3 different plants: Susquehanna, 3 Mile Island, and Peach Bottom. I can tell you Siren location. We worked hard on that, although they've been all dismantled at TMI. And we can tell you ampacity levels, but Ace, I wish I could, I can't. The DEP is comfortable that they can reach in and get access to the licensees' equipment. I've always thought that monitoring is grossly inadequate, whether it's aquatic, terrestrial, atmospheric, effluent. It just seems to be very arbitrary and just an economic component that they have to do. Some states are probably better than others, but Ace, I don't have an answer to you. And now that we're in Pennsylvania's a deregulated state, I don't know about California. It's a race to the bottom. These guys are all competing against one another, and however they can cut costs, they do.
Yeah. Well, and I know you just stated kind of that monitoring is, you consider arbitrary and almost not pointless, but Carol and Nancy wonder what is the most effective monitoring communities can do themselves, if at all possible or if at all useful.
Yeah, no, I think it is useful. I really do. And it gave us a great, they gave 2 things that are really important about monitoring is that I don't know of any community that really implicitly trusts the folks operating their nuclear power plant. And I know when we first began, there was this arrogance, on the one hand, you had the NRC guys and the licensing guys were nuclear Navy guys. So they were high character dudes, but they were all engineers and they figured they could formula everything out. The problem is people aren't hypotheticals, they're real. So I'm saying this because part of the service that we provided was psychological. The community was happy to know that somebody other than the NRC, other than the licensee, was monitoring. And I think, and look, when we did the settlements, this is what the community wants. First and foremost, radiation monitoring. So whatever you do, I would do it well, have it funded. I think it's immensely valuable. And I think the monitoring for an operating plan is different than for spent fuel or dry cask. I don't know if that answers your question. I would just say from our perspective is we started in 93 and we're resulted 27. It's a long time. Like we always said, radiation doesn't take vacations and neither should we, but you're a human being.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the biggest challenge I think for both sides of this issue is the transference of institutional knowledge. People are getting older, and this is an area where people tend to specialize. But look, you guys, and I'm happy to help when we can. You have a baseline to work off. There's a lot of interest. I would speculate that 10 years from now, there may not be the same level of interest. And
do you think it will go up or down?
Well, no, I would just say this. Americans tend to have the attention span of a fruit fly. Honestly, nobody gives a shit about the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Katrina, that might have happened. It was happened when the Pharaoh was around. TMI were ancient. I know in Pennsylvania, the only part of history that people seem to really enjoy is the shit they can reenact. So, my sense is it's hard to maintain attention on any single issue. And I don't even know that it's a healthy thing, to be honest with you. Live your life, enjoy your life. So, whenever you're doing the monitoring, just make sure it's transferable. Have the equipment, have the people, and then you're going to have to upgrade it. And look, that's, to me, part of what we do is develop a public record that, we are in the we are moving our biological research to the Smithsonian this year, which we never thought would happen. And the Smithsonian is gambling that all our specimens will reveal the severity of the accident down the road. So, I just encourage people, stay the course, be persistent, be consistent, do good science. But if you looked at where we were when we began to monitor and where we finished, it was a whole different world. And we would not have gotten there without partnering with workers at the plant. I can't tell you to do that, but we just didn't have that technology. I'll tell you what's interesting, a lot of difference in opinions between statisticians and health physicists on what data means.
Well, we'll have to keep that in mind. We definitely are looking at a lot of the regional groups are advocating for independent monitoring at San Onofre specifically. And so kind of helping with the community's psychological kind of safety of what's going on and really focusing on transparency.
Well, let me just say three things as a cautionary tale that we learned the hard way. Most of the general public doesn't know the difference between a rat and a wren. Really don't know the difference between Tetley's tea and tritium. So, you need to be careful. Open and transparent, I think, is real healthy, but how you manage and parse out the information is important. And I'll give you an example. In the 90s, Saturday TV station wanted to do a story on a radiation release at TMI. They called me, I talked to the DEP, I talked to the NRC, and I talked to the company, and it was a false positive. I said, please don't run the story, you're gonna alarm people. I'm telling you what my monitors are telling me. There's nothing there. They ran the story at 6 and they ran the story at 11. Story didn't even appear in the newspaper the next day. So, it's your biggest asset is your credibility. And so you're communicating information to people that they're not going to be able to evaluate, and you don't want to endanger your credibility. And I will be frank with you. There are times when I've said nothing rather than say something that I couldn't verify. I'm just
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just not, going to do it. So, again, that's what's the other thing is people want answers quickly. And even if you have real-time radiation monitoring, it takes time to evaluate the data you're looking at. And it's frustrating because the newspaper doesn't want this story tomorrow.
No, they don't know.
It's a challenge, but I think it is really a worthwhile experience. And what it made it worthwhile for us is that we were able to tie in emergency planning, radiation monitoring, KI distribution, a number of things around nuclear that made people, I think our biggest success is that people started to question it without pushing them in that direction. At some point people kind of get it. What's really interesting to me is that even the pro-nuclear people rarely have a spent fuel pool in their backyard. The other thing I would say, and I don't know if this is helpful, about 10 years ago, I was on a speaking tour with a president of the Chamber of Commerce. And, he looked at me and said, Eric, we don't hate clean air and we don't hate clean water. He had a good point. We're for it too. Which I wish he would have said before I killed it. The point being is, and again, I don't know if this is helpful, it's important to find commonality. So if I meet with somebody, and I don't know them from a used can of spray paint, the first thing I'm going to ask them, if you're from Pennsylvania, I'll find out if they're a Steeler or an Eagle fan, if they're a Notre Dame or a Penn State fan. And I'm being serious because humanize a relationship. Just what do you have in common? Let's go from there. What are your kids doing? And there's always time to kill them off later, but I can't emphasize enough the value of relationships. A lot of the monitoring we did wouldn't have been successful if somebody at the plant didn't tell us, hey, Eric, why don't you look at this?
Yeah, those make a difference, and having community relations is super important. So Pierce Flynn asks, does the development of controlled nuclear fusion promise safe energy? And specifically, Doug also asks for you to comment on James Hansen's fourth generation thorium, modular, and fusion reactors.
Well, I'll tell you what Michio Kaku told me in the 80s. I don't really look at nuclear. I mean, nuclear is like boiling water. It's done. It's over. Look, this may seem ironic to you. I would support nuclear research because I think we're going to deal with the back end of nuclear power infinitum. And I think we need to have trained engineers to manage waste. I think nuclear is over. So, I mean, I don't want to be cruel or arrogant or dismissive. I spend no time looking at it, small modular reactor, pebble bed reactor. So I don't want to waste your time giving you conjecture on an issue that I don't evaluate at all.
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, to be honest with you, we were looking for solutions based, it wasn't nuclear. We were looking for a way in Pennsylvania, which is a state that is not user-friendly to solar and wind. And I was a wind developer, and I can tell you this, that the criticism I got from the Audubon Society was just as visceral as a criticism I got from you're not in the John Birch Society on the nuclear side. So all we were trying to do was find an economical source of energy that wasn't nuclear. And with a recognition that this is a coal state that's losing its coal assets. So towards that end, I have to be honest with you, we just, we looked at other ways to create energy in this state. We've been successful.
Yep.
I mean, but that was largely due, I think, to the alternative energy portfolio.
Got it. So Holly Pickerel and Susan Whale wonder, what is the most useful thing the average citizen can do and should do now?
Well, they should send me a check for a large amount of money. I'm trying to think how to answer that. I mean, does this pertain to monitoring or nuclear or?
Yeah, just monitoring nuclear, what you found to be successful and how you would suggest community members can contribute.
Well, I think whatever you're interested in, stay with it. I wouldn't spread yourself too thin. I think you also have to recognize that nuclear is a roller coaster. It goes in cycles in terms of interest. I think, we've developed ourselves into a credible resource that Republicans and Democrats alike can call on. And the other thing we do is we offer them alternatives and options. So right now we're working on legislation, and we're doing it with a conservative senator, that how do we, California has this, we don't, how do we transition off of retired coal, gas, and nuclear stations? Because a lot of those communities, it's a monocrop, one crop, they're totally dependent on it. So the school district, the county, all the taxing authorities. So, if there's one thing, I just think it's engage people, develop relationships, have solutions. That's work for us. We did a lot with land use also and land planning. And I think that has value, but I think it changes based on where you're at, honestly, and what you have time for. I would tell you what not to do. I'm divorced and didn't spend enough time with my family. I wish I hadn't done that. I'm being honest with you, because you can just get sucked into this and kind of lose track of what's important.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about and to kind of dive into when it comes to nuclear. So another question. Luis is curious, what are your initial thoughts about Congressman Mike Levin's recent legislative efforts?
I don't really know a lot about it. I mean, honestly, I would defer, Luis, to the folks in DC. We tend to be very parochial about what's happening. So right now I can tell you what we're doing, but I don't know. I've heard of that, and I'm informed by NEARS and Beyond Nuclear and groups like that, but we just play here. We are, I'll be honest with you, and I don't know how you folks are in California or around the country. We're parochial. If it's not, I'm the sheriff of my town, and what happens in other towns, God bless you. I hope it works out. I can just tell you if things don't go well, you'll hear from us. What happens, and I mean, it's not my business to tell other people what to do or how to do it. I just don't want them telling me what to do or how to do it. And I'll give you an example. At Peach Bottom, folks were disappointed when we had the video footage of the guards. We got it from another guard. So we had the footage. I don't know if you remember that about 10 years ago, the guard sleeping on the job.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, Peach Bottom this is true. I remember being in Peach Bottom one time and just going as a Jewish guy, wow, why are all the Dale Earnhardt flags at half mast? I didn't realize that he died in a car accident and the entire community was traumatized, but that's a community. So, we were down there dealing with the issue. And so when you ask the workers, what do you want? Not me telling you what you want. They want to work for Wagon Hut. They wanted to work for Exelon. They didn't want to work double shifts, but they continued to want to work at the nuclear power plant. So if you want to say why we're successful, okay, if that's what you want, that's what we'll work towards. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Because you shouldn't have to drive 50 miles each way to work at Walmart. So that was interesting because the security guard that brought us that video, somebody had asked me earlier about the NRC. I called the NRC. I said, I got the video. We're going to have to do business here. This is what time it is, Pops. I'll write you a letter, write another one. And then we just said, hey, screw you. We're going to put it on TV. How do you like me now? But at the end of the day, it was not what I wanted. It's if people living out in a rural part of TM, and that's a good job, working security. If I can get them better benefits, if I can get them not working forced overtime and they're happy, I'm happy.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So we have a few more technical questions. We have about 10 more. Are you still okay on time?
Yeah, a little. Brian, are you still there? Yeah, I'm good. Just you get my address so you know where to send the checks. That's what always worried me about Jewish conspiracies. I've never got my check. So I want to make sure after we're done here, you got the address. For those of you who think there's some kind of conspiracy, 4100 Hillsdale Road, Harrisburg, PA. Send me the shit, man. I'm dying out here.
We'll send some lot keys.
Yeah, don't you love that? Like we ran out of oil, but we had enough oil to make pancakes. You got to worry about our priorities.
Oh.
Well, the other thing, why is it a miracle of lights when we have the only piece of property in the Middle East with no oil? But okay, go ahead.
So Peter Anderson asked, what is the worst case scenario for a major crack in a canister?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know, but I would say this, and I think it's a good question. Better to have the monitoring there so you know that the crack exists rather than have it exist in isolation for a significant period of time. But I don't want to speculate about, fires or other consequences because I'm really not knowledgeable on that.
Got it. And so Kevin Camps is curious. Would hardened
Michigan Kevin, yeah, go ahead.
Would hardened on-site storage be doable at 3 Mile Island?
Oh, Kevin, it not only will be doable, it may be our only option. Look, when I got involved with this is what I was told. When we're done at your nuclear power plant, we're going to restore it to its original site condition, and you can build an elementary school there. Well, we'd have to remind the NRC, 3 Mile Island, we know the family that used to farm it at the turn of the century. 3 Mile Island is rich farmland because it floods all the time. And so you used to have to send a barge out there. And by the way, the name isn't 3 Mile Island. It isn't 3 miles, but I think we lost that game a long time ago. I think Kevin has a really good, I think it's the absolute worst place to store waste. On an island in a river that floods frequently, that empties into the most productive estuary in North America. It's kind of like whoever drew this up must have been hanging out with Ken Kesey. right now, the plans are such that the waste will be stored on the former parking lot grounds.
Okay.
It's just an economic imperative. I'll be honest with you. We signed settlement agreements, and I don't know what it's like in California, but Exelon in Pennsylvania has the ability for inter-license waste storage arrangements. So Limerick was sending their waste to Peach Bottom. So when, the Exelon fleet includes, TMI, Limerick, Peach Bottom, Calvert Cliffs, Oyster Creek, 2 plants in New York, we were always defensive, Kevin. It was like, we got enough here. We don't want anybody bringing anything onto the island. But I really believe that everything should be removed from an island. I'm not optimistic. If I would share my hardcore political option with you, I think at the end of the day, you're probably going to see what I call the BRAC solution. We have a military base around here. I think nuclear waste sites might wind up being a former federal military reservation because it's a soft environmental playing field and they're proximate to plants. And I know how people in those communities are. We have one near here. So absolutely the wrong place to store waste, but absolutely that will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So next one, Dane asks, how deep will they dig to remove contaminated soil and materials buried at 3 Mile Island? Was this allowed by the NRC?
Is this related to TMI2 and the accident?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The soil was packaged and sent to Idaho. The problem is that the building itself is highly radioactive. So you're going to, look, the basement is still at a lethal level. There is nobody at TMI. It's abandoned. So TMI is really interesting in that Unit 1 is owned by Exelon and Unit 2 is owned by First Energy, and they don't, and First Energy has no boots on the ground. So any monitoring that occurs at TMI2 is done by Exelon. They rent out their people to go over there, but nobody really gives a shit. In about 2009, they were bragging about how secure they were. I took a New York Times photographer on the island and they couldn't find me for an hour. And it's a really expansive island. It's big. And it was during a refueling outage. And, what's interesting is how, and this is, this goes kind of to the question that was asked earlier. How much do you really tell the public without freaking them out? Do you really want to tell them about the spent fuel pools and the dry cast not working and this, that, and the other thing? I'm a former professor of Holocaust studies, and one of the lessons there was when we taught about the Holocaust, you had to dilute the content in order to reach the person you were teaching. When it comes to nuclear, you have to craft a message that's understandable and doesn't get people to the point where they deal with it by not dealing with it. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? Because most people tomorrow, it's Michigan State versus Penn State, and don't bother me here. And on Thursday, don't bother me because it's a TV night. And so whatever it is, how do I, monitor this really important issue? Let them know that there's a safety challenge without freaking them out. And at the same time, being honest enough to tell them that you're going to absolutely have little to no success. So we have our work cut out for us. It's a really tough gig. And I just keep back to develop the relationships, transfer the institutional knowledge. It's a marathon. The people who win are there at the end of the race.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't even remember.
It's definitely a question of framing and making sure that we're educating the public in digestible pieces so that they are not paralyzed and instead act and join.
What was the initial question? I just want to make sure I wasn't evasive. Although
it was how deep will they dig to remove contaminated soil and materials at 3 Mile Island?
Well, the soil has, and I can again send you this if somebody gets, and maybe Amanda, you can, so I don't get inundated with requests, you can just get me stuff and I can send it to you. A lot of that stuff was shipped off site. Again, there was an absence of a baseline going into this, which is also an absence of a baseline for the inventory of what was released. But when it comes to messaging, remember at the time of the TMI accident, there was no 24/7, 365 news cycle. There was no science reporters. There was no environmental reporters. And there was essentially a feud between the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer to cover the story. So one of my good friends is R.B. Swift, and we have his memoirs at the archives. And so what's really interesting is he was an energy reporter. And if you look at his notes, like 3 or 4 days into it, he's going, holy shit, what am I doing here? You know, why am I covering this? And it's also was clear at the accident that they didn't know what they were doing. So you have this level of trust. The reason I'm saying this is the media tends to be superficial. That's not a criticism of anybody. You know, there's a portion that goes to filming, a portion that goes to blogging, a portion usually doesn't go to researching an issue like nuclear. So, you know, it's a challenge and people change out. In the old days, it was the same person for a long time. You had the institutional knowledge, and the institutional knowledge that the media has is a little different. And what's interesting and what we found is, so I do a story with a TV reporter. That story then is going to get messaged, picked up by paper. That's going to go regional, if not out to the Sacramento Bee. So, you know, I've got to be really careful about how I craft the message, what I'm saying, how I'm getting it out. And at the same time, being aware I live in a world where most of the population has the attention of a fruit fly, and you're not getting more than 8 seconds on one TV bite. Now, this is going to seem strange to you, but I've also been a host of a conservative radio show for 15 years on The Substitute. And due to the government reform work, a lot of people like me because of I'm critical of the government. I'm not really sure that there's a place for Jewish survivalists, but you know, I have this little niche. The reason I'm telling you that is I have more credibility when I do the Bob Durgan show or the Ken Matthews show than when I've done anything else. It's absolutely amazing. The audience is about 100,000. And I don't do nuclear because I don't think it's fair. You know, it would give me a partisan advantage. So when it comes to messaging, I don't know about what it's like in Senate. Our newspaper publishes 2 days a week in Harrisburg, every day in Lancaster, every day in York. And we work really hard at developing good relationships with all the reporters. I'm not really sure how we got there from soil.
Well, it was a path, and it was fun to kind of come along with you on that. So Ryan asked, what's Exelon's strategy overall in all of the states they operate in, related or unrelated to nuclear?
Well, they're selling off their, I think, alternative energy assets. I mean, all I can do is talk about Pennsylvania. There were 3 incumbent utilities when we did deregulation. They all own nuclear power plants. At Beaver Valley and TMI2, PPL had Susquehanna, and then Exelon had TMI1, Limerick, and Peach Bottom. Limerick and Peach Bottom are profitable, very profitable. So in Pennsylvania, we defeated them on the bailout, but what they've done is they've scaled down staffing, minimal emergency preparedness planning. So I don't know what their strategic architecture is in other states. It appears, based on TMI, they lost $300 million in 5 years. They shut themselves down. And that's why I said it comes back to economics. I've said this from the beginning. To me, it's the 3 W's. When you're looking at nuclear, Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street was our biggest. Wall Street, not Main Street, probably cleaned it down. I think water is an ally. And then the W of where's the waste going to go? Just keep hammering at those 3 issues. See if folks can come up with an answer. Definitely they won't come up with a solution. However, what has happened, and I think what's going to happen with Exelon here, and I don't know about, is they're going to retreat into a regulated protocol. So the way PP&L survived is they shed all their generating assets. Essentially, Talon Energy, who's operating a nuclear power plant, has no business operating a nuclear power plant. Exelon and their look, that, you know, and I've said this to Exelon, you know, tough shit. You guys gambled on nuclear and lost. Okay, not, you know, are you a capitalist or not? You know, I mean, really, it's not my problem what happens. That my problem is, what are you doing to the community in terms of community giving, taxation and jobs. And if you're not helping us, then so Exelon's strategy in Pennsylvania, I'm not really sure what it is. They didn't really seem to be focused during the bailout. New York, they seem, you'd have to ask Tim, Maryland, the Kevin or Tim of the groups in DC. But here, I think it's likely that Beaver Valley will go down too, which is a first energy plant, and we'll be left with 3. And Pennsylvania is second after Illinois in terms of nuclear concentration. One of the things we don't talk about is Westinghouse used to be the gold standard in the nuclear industry, and they're now Toshiba.
Yeah. So that your kind of mention of Beaver Valley brings up another question. So Mitchell states, I'm not at all convinced that the Beaver Valley nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania has any future. What are your thoughts?
I think he's right. Beaver Valley is interesting. So Beaver County used to be a very strong Democratic political base. The western part of the state is moving to the red. They're Reagan Democrats. And I'm going to tell you this because the landscape has changed. The unions are sympathetic to nuclear and jobs. Although, we've worked with the unions to say we may want to look at other vocations. I don't know how many people are going to be making Boilermakers down the road. But that part of the state is also very rich in gas assets. Gas has changed everything. We are the second largest gas producer in the country. We're a gas state now. And so it doesn't really matter what Exelon or First Energy think about nuclear. Nobody gives a shit because they're not employing people. They're not what gas is. 30% of our electric is sold to states that don't frack, like New York. So look, Pennsylvania never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And so we had a lot of coal, had a lot of timber, screwed that up. We have a lot of gas, no severance tax will probably screw that up. But right now, if you're in the legislature, it's gas driving the energy car and not nuclear. And so to his question about Beaver Valley, Beaver County also has a large cracker plant. If Beaver Valley shuts down, for instance, the economic hit at 3 Mile Island wasn't really that big because we had diversified. A lot of state government, Rite Aid is based here, Hershey is based here, a lot of tourism. We took the hit and moved on. Beaver Valley is probably not good. I'm not going to say it's not going to be consequential, but I think he's right. I think Beaver Valley goes down. Plus, I'm not really sure that First Energy is the nuclear gold standard.
So our next one is from Jan. She wonders how the decision was made to send the melted core to INL. Was the public consulted?
That's a really good question because it was very uncomfortable time for me because people around the country didn't want our fuel. But then it goes, everybody on this call would probably say storing it on an island is not a great solution either. We had a thing called the TMI advisory panel, which was pretty successful. We met for 13 years. It was 12 scientists, citizens from all political stripes, and we met 4 times a year, mostly in Harrisburg and Lancaster. And why it was successful was funded by the NRC, a guy by the name of Dr. Michael Masnick, who was committed to citizen participation. At these meetings, the licensee, the NRC, everybody had to take questions. So when the fuel removal began, the public was able to interact with decision makers and policy makers. I think, to be honest, we were probably more parochial than folks across the country would want us to be. We wanted it out. And it was a heavy lift to get it out. Remember, there was no decommissioning funding. So in '82, the governor put together what was known as the Thornburg Plan. It was $987 million to remove the fuel. TMI-2 has not been decontaminated or decommissioned. So to be fair, the priority was let's get as much out as we can. And where it goes, to be honest with you, I don't remember there being a ton of debate about it. And honestly, I don't I think that was a decision that was probably made. A deal was cut.
Yeah, got it.
I mean, but
Okay.
honestly,
Well,
what am I going to? I mean, to defend me is okay. We took shit because people said why are we bailing them out? I'm like, well, because I don't want an insolvent company presiding over the cleanup. All right. So I'm also not, and I'm not going to say, well, let's hold on to the waste until we find the best place to take it. There was one place, one option. That's where it's going, and that's just part of big boy politics. I accept the criticism from people who don't want it there. I get it. But as I've been saying throughout, we're a solution-based group. You don't get anything for a tie. And look, issues are only have value for an ephemeral period of time. TMI used to be covered every day by we had one TMI reporter in Harrisburg. Every day. In fact, our weather reports had radiation readings. And that was brought by the company, which meant nothing. So again, trying to put you into the vortex of the time, it's like, hell, these people don't have money. Let's find the money. We got the money. Let's clean it up. All right, now that we're cleaning it up, let's get rid of the fuel. We didn't have the ability to contemplate or the luxury of deciding where can we go without offending the least amount of people.
mhm. So we're in the home stretch with just 4 more
Thank
questions,
God.
and so we're almost there. In regard to tritium gaseous effluents at TMI, esteemed Sean Burney tells us that steam releases were ceased due to the impossibility of filtering the tritium from the steam. Kathy Iwani asks, can you recommend a lab in the US that will analyze and measure both liquid and gaseous tritium batch releases from nuclear power plants?
No, I can't. I mean, our experience with tritium had to do with the evaporation of 2.3 million gallons of radioactive water. I can send you the material we had in that. I mean, it's a isotope that can't be separated from water, so you're effed. I'm not really sure why I'm being careful about my language now, but we had a tritiated water issue, and we have tritium leaks like every plant has. I mean, you have groundwater leaks that look. I know that it may take them a while to reach a creek or whatever. I don't think so. I think we insisted on more ground well testing and didn't get it. So I can't. Maybe somebody else can. It's not that it's not important. I just don't have any information on that.
Got it. So just another question. When a canister at San Onofre almost got dropped in 2018, Southern California Edison reported higher levels of radiation. Jim Wade asks if you can provide insight for the spike in radiation.
I cannot. I mean, I was aware of it. I'm not familiar with any of the material. I know there was a lot of coverage and we were aware of it, but I don't have any additional meaningful information to add.
Okay. And then another question, what can be done to find safe repositories nationwide?
Well, I mean, I think you stop generating the waste, would seem to me rational. I mean, I go back to me, it's an ethical quandary. What I used to say to students, and this shows how old I am, 500 years ago, Columbus was coming to the country, for better or worse. I think probably for worse. I mean, I still don't understand why I have a holiday for a guy that went the wrong way, but that's because my tribe has gone the wrong way for a long time. We should have a month off. That being said, I think that we're going to be viewed as environmental Philistines. 500 years from now, people are going to be babysitting this shit. And they're going to be going, are you serious? Are you really? I mean, because the economic model in Pennsylvania is used and useful. It's used or useful. So if I'm getting the electric product, it's used or useful, then I'm on the hook for paying for it. The next generation, the generation that receive no benefit at all, none from nuclear power, and they're going to be assigned, to deal with nuclear waste. I think nuclear waste disposal is going to make the Superfund look minimal. I mean, I don't want to belittle the Superfund because it was huge and it was important, but this is the next big boondoggle. it's gonna, I don't know about anybody else on the phone, but I've heard all these things. We'll shoot it into space. We'll put it in Kansas. We'll take it to Nevada. Whatever. It always seems to me, and this is to respond directly to the question, is at the end of the day, it's the path of political least resistance. Where can we go where there's not going to be resistance, or who can we bribe? Because I think right now, my assumption was that they were going to try and bully different Native American regions for the waste. I can tell
That's
you,
correct.
our perspective is a little different. We have 5,000 miles worth of waterways that are gone forever because of acid mine drainage. We have 5 fires in Pennsylvania that have been burning for decades. So we have a good frame of reference for forever. And the other cautionary tale is, once the coal was mined and the operators were gone, nobody gives a shit. I'm going to be real frank with you. Once they're gone, they're gone. They ain't coming back. And, when you go up to the anthracite region and see the carnage in how it's been eviscerated, it's telling about what we're going to face. In fact, one of the challenges we have is I don't think our problem is as visible as coal mine issues.
Mhm.
If we would get in a car, drive an hour, and I'd go up, to some of the, go up to Pottsville, Centralia is still on fire. I take reporters there, within where 3 Mile Island is, you have coal history, you have steel history, you have oil, you have all this, you have gas transmission lines, and it's never a good ending, ever. It never ends well. I don't care what it is. Transmission lines, we have the Texas Eastern, we had PCBs all over the place. Coal mines are deserted. They're gone. And why would you think that nuclear operators would be any different?
Yeah, we don't. I don't think it will be.
No, so you got to hold them accountable while you can. And I don't want to be grim, because I think you guys, I've been really impressed by Amanda and Bart and everybody on the call for what you guys do. And I think you can succeed.
Well, thank you. So the last question is from Mary Beth.
The last question should be, what's my address to send the checks? That should be the last question. But prior to that,
I think we got that. 4100 Hillsdale Road.
Harrisburg, 17112. Yeah.
Yep. All right, we got you. So Mary Beth asked you to comment on the cancer cluster in humans and animals around 3 Mile Island, and about any other current lawsuits you're involved in.
Well, the health lawsuits are done. I'll try to be brief here. So Sylvia Rambo, that's the name of the judge, exercised the Daubert rule in the early 90s. So she threw out our expert witnesses. So we knew at that time that the health suits would not have any legs, so to speak. And the irony is, Sylvia is a nice woman, a judge. We used to have a used furniture and antique store. There was a row of Eastern Jewish merchants in Harrisburg, and she used to shop there. So, I was kind of conflicted because I still wanted to sell her old walnut furniture. However, that being said, she invokes the Daubert rule, throws out our expert witnesses. Up until that time, because of the orphan court's rules in Pennsylvania, all the health suits involving children were published. So at a minimum, you're thinking about $100 million in damages, health cases, evacuation expense, loss of business revenue.
Mm-hmm.
A little caveat I would point out about TMI is, if, and God forbid this should happen, there's an incident or accident and they ask for an emergency evacuation, you need to get it as far out as possible. Ours was a precautionary evacuation for 5 miles. So when we went to court, the company said, we're not going to pay 5 miles 1 inch past a precautionary evacuation, as if there's some invisible lead curtain. So about $100 million in suits for economic business expenses and health. On the cancer clusters, the person who really pioneered that was Norman and Marjorie Amat. They live up in Lake Placid. And they basically correctly concluded that the radiation went certain places. So why don't we see where the cancer was? I included those clusters in my last slide. Mm-hmm. And what we found, and again, that's why I suggested looking at the categories, which is the most underreported study surrounding TMI. And the first time, this is true, the first time I met Stuart Katagiri, the first thing he said to me is, "Why don't your pants fit?" And I'm like, man, dude, you're in the wrong town. So it turned out we became pretty good friends. But so my way of answering is that health studies at TMI are overlays, that one builds on the other. So right now we have our last cancer survey going out that TMI Alert is doing. That data is going to be mined by other people down the road. There is a website for the survivors at TMI, and they chat all the time. The Hershey thyroid study is out there. So it is my firm belief, and I've said this for a long time, that the recognition that 3 Mile Island caused adverse health effects is not going to occur until the principals leave the stage, kind of like Utah or Nevada bomb victims, or similar to the settlement that was out in Apollo in the western part of the state. So if you can reconcile that, I view our role as developing a public record and documenting as many primary witnesses as we can. I mean, when I taught the Holocaust, I would just tell my student that it's a crime scene, all right? You're going to need forensic evidence and you're going to need anecdotal evidence, and you should not discount either one. But if you put that together, you'll get a pretty good feel what happened. And so we concentrated our efforts in talking to people, and our people don't lie, and our people consistently have the same experience: metallic taste, sunburn, irritation, diarrhea, vomiting. To answer the second part of the question, Dr. Weber, Robert Weber, is the person you need to look at. The veterinarians reported before anybody that this is not good. But again, we were overwhelmed. I mean, we can go back in history. We have all this technology and all these resources. TMI Alert operated out of the Harrisburg Center for Peace and Justice. When we started meeting with people, there was an urban, rural Vietnam deal, man. It was a tough haul. So that when we finally were able to, and I can remember it, do the survey, there was a lot of dissension internally within the communities. And so I don't know if that answered your question. On our website, we have a summary of the health surveys and the psychological studies of everything that's gone on. But the last thing I would say is, and I don't know if we're going to release it, about 10 years ago, we did a documentary that was absolutely raw, and we never released it. I went down to Edders and Goldsboro, which is in the West Shore, right across from the river. And we interviewed 4 young people who were experienced the accident and had health effects. I made the mistake of not having them sign a form before. We went back and they refused to sign. But if you ever see that footage, it's the TMI second generation. It's bruising. The one thing I can tell you is I was talking to the one guy who was an Iraqi war veteran, and, I'll be honest with you, we're doing this video and I'm a little uncomfortable because we're smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. It's not this, but these guys are river rats. They live on the river, they fish, they hunt. And at one point I said, so, you were in elementary school, right? He goes, yeah. So I said, what did they tell you to do? He said, oh, this is what I was told to do. Walk home with a book over my head and not breathe until I got home. And it's like, wow, holy shit. That was a mindset and a mentality back then. So why would I trust these people who are telling our people to do that with health data? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think the book's really going to help shield people from that.
Yeah, but look, if you don't mind, I do have to go. It's 4:30 Eastern time. And do you need that address again?
I think we have the address, but I just wanted to thank you for your investment of time and all the history you've shared with us. We have a lot of work ahead and are excited to kind of move forward. And so now's the time, if everybody wants to unmute their their mic to say thank you. And we look forward to continuing our relationship.